All right, we've got FOMC this week. Altcoins have gone a bit flat, retail's gone quiet, and somehow Trump's making headlines in the UK again. But this is the thing, this week actually might matter. It just maybe is just a tick in the box confirmation that we are potentially more than likely going to get a pause. But we're going to look at the chart and see what we can see, and maybe we might actually be catching people off guard. And as I say, retail have gone quiet, and quite a lot of people may have got trapped already. If you like some updates with a dash of sarcasm, feel free to slap the like button and subscribe. It would mean a lot. And comment, what do you think the Fed will do? I'm presuming you're going to say pause. So, right, pause. It helps. So, my personal belief is that I think that retail are back. And they've been back for a couple of weeks, but kind of not as barbaric as you think. There's obviously been a few comments on my YouTube videos about people asking certain questions, and it's been a bit odd. And seeing people return to certain things, and the metrics are looking good. But on the screen here is the ETF inflow for Ethereum, right? And this has been pretty strong. And we talk about how Ethereum is a really big play and how altcoins are somewhat bleeding into Ethereum a little bit. Not so much the other way around, which kind of what want altcoins to do well versus everything, not so much just versus Ethereum, right? But I feel, and I agree with a couple of other content creators, we are going into that late phase of the cycle where we might actually get that big run on Bitcoin, and it may well lead to a charge of everything else going a bit mental. When we talk about obviously the Bitcoin ETF, it had a bit of a wobble the last couple of weeks. At certain points, not it's been strong, it's been weak, it's been strong, been kind of a bit flat. It's one of those. It's doing well still, but it still is much high, and the demand is still there. But as I say, when we're looking at certain situations like this, we lose due to fake outs or it's standing still, and people lose money basically thinking there's a big move when the market is just kind of about to chill out for a bit. But then that big move eventually comes, which is kind of where we're going to go with it. Because in my viewpoint, my personal opinion is I think Bitcoin's going to go for a run very soon. I've just got a little hidden feeling that this monthly time frame's gearing up, right? And we've talked about this before in the past, how Bitcoin goes for these big monumental legs, right? And we've kind of done a couple of candles, but not enough in my viewpoint. Go to the weekly time frame, it's somewhat consolidating. That's absolutely fine. Going down to the daily time frame, you can see it is literally ranging. And this is just a prime example of how Bitcoin can behave and does behave at certain points. And what we're seeing overall is Bitcoin is still leading the charge versus everything else at the minute, which is a bit mental. And you may not see that in the chat, you may not feel that in the chat, but we do need to talk about altcoins quite a lot because that liquidity does have to come around at some point. And the question is, how high does Bitcoin go for the search metrics to really take notice of? Like, in terms of, if you're thinking about it logically, this week matters because if Bitcoin runs, you're going to see people talk about Bitcoin. And then people are going to look at Ethereum. Then they're going to look at Ethereum and go, that's quite cheap. But then they might look at altcoins and go, oh, they're even cheaper. And then that whole psychological behavior comes around again. And even though there's people in the comment section going, yeah, but they got burnt in the last cycle. But the thing is, people got burnt in 2014 and came back in 2017. People got burnt in 2017, 2018, and they came back in 2021. People will always gravitate to that situation. So we're at a point where Bitcoin is high, dominance is high, altcoins are low, right? The risk on environment across the S&P 500, the Nasdaq, the Russell 2000, they're all looking pretty good. So what happens next? Well, if this runs, I think that's a trigger. But as I've alluded to it, altcoins are doing not much, but there's enough happening just to kind of keep you on point a little bit. This is the Ethereum side of the market, the Ethereum / BTC. Is this the bottom potentially? The Bitcoin dominance has been dropping on this indicator here, which is very key. It's free, by the way, if you want to jump in. Altcoins are kind of like, that one mate at the gym who turns up and, never lifts weights, but ultimately it's just going to ghost and do something daft and never come back again. So altcoins are not doing a lot, but there's enough to kind of keep you a little bit kind of focused, if that makes sense. So this is the Ethereum BTC pair, which looks like it has somewhat bottomed. It's changed character. It's looking relatively strong. And this is the thing. This is the only thing that's realistically moving on the right-hand side of the screen underneath my bonds here. You can see, yeah, weird, isn't it? So this situation, it's not so much like smart money's rotating yet. Retail are kind of here, but losing probably some interest in everything else. And you can see on the Google Trends, you can see on the ETF inflows, even comments under my videos, people are kind of slowly returning, but they're probably going to existing elements. And they're probably looking at Ethereum going, that's quite cheap, that. versus what it was. I'm going to buy it. So it's very, very interesting. And again, we talk about like the BTC pair and the BTC dominance. What's going to happen next? Are we going to do a situation of an A or a B? Are we going to go higher first, or are we just going to drop? All depends on Ethereum. It all depends on how high Bitcoin goes. Well, if Bitcoin really runs and outperforms altcoins, well, B is going to happen. If Bitcoin does do a bit of a jolt and Ethereum runs with it or beats it, guess what? A is going to happen. Right? That's kind of the two scenarios. But that's the thing. It's very, very interesting to look at the market and see where we go next because we're not there yet. But this week, as I say, is quite important to kind of give us that metric because what it's going to lead into is further information that could help us. And this could be pulling back into a certain level. And we could be going much, much higher if it finds levels of support. And again, we talk about the USD dominance. This is still dropping. It's still potentially going down to these levels because it is risk on, even still, which is mad when you think about it, considering what's been going on around the world. So, yeah, interesting because I think guaranteed, we're going to talk about FOMC in a minute, we're going to get a rate pause, right? September, rate cut. Even though there's pressure from Donald Trump, but that could be the fuel to the fire, which is why this week's important because it's not so much, right, about what Powell does, sorry. It's more about what he says, which is key. So let's talk about this whole FOMC malarkey. Trump looms large over Fed likely to, again, defy his calls for cuts. He's been talking about cuts for ages. And we are expected a pause. It's like 3%, 3% for a cut, which is quite low. So what actually matters here, as I said before, is what Powell says. Does he say words like higher for longer? Does he expect volatility? Is he going to say certain things? What's his tie going to look like? How is his hair done? Is he going to shit himself on stage? I don't know. There's so many unanswered questions about what he's going to say, which is going to probably give us that market reaction. We need to keep an eye on USD dominance for one matter. We've got to see what price action of Bitcoin is, what the inflows do. What does the S&P do? What does the Russell do? What does the dollar do? What does the the Nasdaq do? All that kind of stuff. We've got to look at what they do, and obviously the bond rate and the yields and all that kind of stuff, right? But the reality is, Donald Trump is just putting pressure on the whole entire, committee, so to speak, of the Fed. It's not just Powell that does the one decision. It's it's an accumulation of yes, no's, three bags full, sir. It's what Powell says, which is the most important factor here. So, as we talk about it, and there's certain situations, there's certain things about rate cuts, and there's some disagreements behind closed doors. You know, already, Christopher Waller's already hinted that he may publicly dissent on Wednesday if his colleagues vote to keep rates unchanged. So there's obviously a little bit of a kind of a fraction here where they're thinking, well, what could happen? We don't know. We might be shocked. What if we get a rate cut in July because people have had their heads turned and that's it? It's all behind closed doors. Open speculation, but could happen. But even when we look back and we look at like some real time lessons here, I'm looking in the comments all the time, and I know there's a lot of scam comments, and I do go through as many as I can. But don't confuse short term dips for macro structure breaking, because I think people flap, and I think that realistically is just the fact that retail are coming in because it is very much like liquidation station every single time because they just get blasted. And even the mass media of like the headlines and the same things and the same people saying "I told you so." It's an absolute nightmare. So just be careful of that. But obviously as well, look for confirmation and patience. You're not being paid to be early. You're paid to be right enough times, right? If you are following this trend, for example, with Bitcoin, you might be all right. Even with altcoins, if you buy low enough, you might be all right. It depends what you buy, obviously. But there's going to be a situation where we're going to come back to videos like this and we go, wow, look at these prices, because they've jolted a little bit. But the reality is here, they may not jolt enough for some people who come into the market late, which is where the big problem is. And if you're thinking like me, yeah, Donald Trump might get, his way at some point and rates do fall and, Ethereum starts to flip BTC in the short term and AI starts to come, self-aware and everyone's going to die. No, I'm only joking. But, you get the idea, right? Where things look a little bit better. I think people will be overthinking this game massively. And I think we all do. And I think the biggest overthinking is, in my viewpoint, when we're taking profit. When the market goes up, we need to wait for that profit taking to happen. But we never get there because we're always thinking it's going to go higher, higher, higher. You've got to learn in real time, unfortunately. So what am I watching? What am I doing? Well, I'm just chilling right now. Um, I am in a chain link trade, which is kind of not going well. I've taken most of my money out of here, but I'm going to kind of probably nuke this trade and just take my money completely out of it and just wait and see what the next setup is. Personally, right now there's no real point. I'm looking at the ETF volume; it's still looking pretty good. That is a good hint that we could be pushing there. So obviously we've got USD dominance still dropping, which is fantastic to see. But overall, I'm just monitoring the altcoin structure, and I'm convinced that we've kind of somewhat bottomed, but it's where is the next leg? What's going to happen next? So what trade should I go for? And I'm looking at a load of trades at the minute in terms of overall kind of metrics, and we've had a little bit of a push. We've pulled back, made a lower high. Where do we retrace to? What levels of structure do we find? Do we start finding levels? Do we pop off and then we go again? Do we get above this? You know what I mean? Like we're looking at certain situations. We still are risk on, but ultimately this has gone below certain levels. So I don't want to go short, but ultimately I don't want to no, I don't want to miss some longs. So I'm kind of waiting for longs when we get some momentum again, where we do maybe push up to these levels a bit higher. It does look good on the surface, but we just haven't had that push yet. But if you got looming FOMC, which we haven't had one for a while, by the way, it's going to create a bit of havoc. So yeah, I think this week does matter. As I say, it's been a while since we've had FOMC, not because something will happen, it's because the market is expecting something and it's quite emotional. It's a bit of a tipping point as well. So yeah, most people, in my viewpoint, won't notice until it's too late. But I think if we are here and we're looking at the charts right now, I think we're looking at some really interesting points in the market. Well, let's see what happens next. Anyways, right, you've done so. Feel free to jump in Patreon. There's 50% off if you want more content. Got a Q&A session today. Could be quite fun.